Straight Talk Live, exploring human, digital, and social transformations. Welcome to Straight Talk Live. I'm one of your co-hosts, Rick Snyder. I'm the author of Decisive Intuition and the CEO of Invisible Edge. And this is our not-for-profit video podcast that's almost a year old in its infancy here. We started at the very beginning of COVID, and that's why we started this, is we were not satisfied by the conversations that were happening around the world in terms of human, digital, and social transformation. So Af and I were saying, hey, why don't we do something about that and create a platform for the conversations we all need to be having and to influence the influencers? And so without further ado, here is my co-pilot in crime, Af Malhotra. Af, take it away.
Thank you, Rick. Welcome, everyone. And what a fantastic show today. It's a bit of a dream come true show for us, both Rick and I, and nostalgic in many ways because the gentleman who's on the call today created something that was a big part of my younger life. And I spent hours and hours gaming on my Atari. And I remember my father, who was alive then, was absolutely lambasting me. He was like, what is wrong with you, child? You should be going and reading books. You should be going to the library, because we had libraries those days and encyclopedias. And I was like, no, you just don't understand. And many, many years later now, of course, we have the founder on our show. So loads of questions for Nolan, but I'm going to let Rick do the intros and we'll get right on with it. So as I say, let's crack on.
And I got to fanboy out a little bit for a second also. As a child from the 80s, part of my whole decade was about Atari and Chuck E. Cheese. That's where you had birthday parties as a kid in the 80s. And so that's what we did. And so we actually have the founder of Atari and Chuck E. Cheese and 20 other business ventures throughout the decades. And one of Newsweek's 50 Men Who Changed America. Ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Straight Talk Live, Nolan Bushnell.
Hi,
Nolan, welcome.
Good to be here.
So great to have you here. And one of the things that just doing some history and background on you, just really appreciating how you've been on the leading edge in so many different ways of technology for literally decades. And that takes a lot. I mean, it could be one thing to have one shot at it. It takes a whole other level of, gumption and motivation to keep going and to keep being curious and exploring. So let's start there. What is it about you when you reflect back at your life that is that fuel source that has you continue even well into your 70s, still doing that thing of invention and entrepreneurialism?
You know, I think curiosity is the primary driver for almost everything. And I'm not sure whether it's innate or whether you can curate it or what it is, but I've just kind of always had it. You know, I've always felt that there was more to learn and more to understand. And I find myself going down rabbit holes all the time on various things just because somebody asked me a question that tweaks my interest. And I'm also a large consumer of science fiction. And I believe that science fiction has an interesting place in the world in that the science fiction author can invent things long before they can actually be invented.
Right.
And so in some ways, science fiction is the grist for the future, the probable possible future, the impossible future, science fiction has been having the Ansible for a long time. And yes, there is quantum entanglement, but nobody thinks you can actually build one. And time travel, those are the ones that keep messing around with it, the multiverse and all that. But I think that if you are a curious person and you read science fiction, you can't help but being a little bit on the leading edge.
Can we stay with curiosity just for a moment? Because you talk a lot about, and I'll let you articulate this, some of us being dead. So you talk about the fact that that our brain, some of us are just not curious enough. We haven't woken up to some extent. And there are others who are motivated and pumped and enthusiastic and curious, wanting to learn. Tell us a little bit about, you've got such an incredible history, so many things that you've done, you've succeeded. You may have failed many times. You may regret certain decisions. You may be really delighted with certain decisions. Talk us through, and we're just trying to encapsulate many, many years of just incredible journeys that you've been on. But tell us a little bit about what it used to be like back in the 70s, because I was born in 78, so I missed the action. I'm 6 years out.
You missed the action.
I missed the action.
It was one hell of a decade, Av.
72 onwards. But what was it like then in terms of curiosity and how we thought about things, and what is it now? What is it like now in this age? Give us some perspective.
There's a couple of huge differences. In the early days of the internet, actually in the early days of CD-ROMs, Bill Gates talked about information at your fingertips. And we truly have that now, and we didn't have it in the 70s. You know, your go-to was not Wikipedia, it was Encyclopedia Britannica, and it was already 20 years out of date whenever you had it, if you had a recent one. And so your ability to satisfy curiosity was always damaged to a certain extent, much more than it is now. But when you talk about that, I gave a speech that became controversial a little bit, and in which I said, the most important thing you can do in business is don't hire dead people. and somehow that got picked up, and maybe it's one of those turns of phrases, but it's actually really true that there are a lot of people that are dead. They just don't know it yet. And the last thing you want to do is pay them every Friday.
Describe dead for a moment, just for the audience, because what do you mean?
People who are basically recipe players. They don't think out of the box. They don't have a new idea. They are constantly living a deterministic life of no innovation, no creativity, no out of the box thinking. They're basically just sort of fumbling along. And I think that is as close to dead as you can be while you're still animated.
But do you think in a company that it's realistic to think that everyone's going to be switched on in that entrepreneurial way? Or do you think there are going to be other people that balance that out, that just kind of phone it in, do the job, and they're not really looking at that outside the box possibility?
I think there probably are, but I think and you're going to end it. And quite candidly, there are times that people are switched on, and then certain other times they get switched off a little bit. So we're not a homogeneous individual. Nobody's a homogeneous, really.
Right.
So, but what you really need to do is get people that are passionate about life and about what they're doing. Because, you can hire for education level, you can hire for, business experience, but when it all comes down to, passion is what gets the job done and solves the problems. And people that care. There's a lot of people that don't care about anything, and that's another characteristic of deadness. If you don't care, then you just put life one step in front of the other. Like during this COVID thing, it would be very, very easy. And I found myself slipping into kind of laziness in some aspects, like it turns into Groundhog Day. Every day kind of sort of looks the same. And I come out into my lab and I tinker around, and then I listen to a book, and then I watch a movie, and come on, that's not passionate. But at the same time, I've curated a couple of new businesses during this time, and that's kind of been fun and gone down a couple of weird rabbit holes. But I guess the that we want to do is live an active, happy life. Be happy. Be enthusiastic.
Yes.
Do you see, because you've traveled the world and you just talked about, before we came on the call, you talked about your 6 months with your family in the UK, in London. Do you see environmental factors? More, what I mean by that is culture and the locality, the region you're based in, has a factor to play here. And I give just because I know it's a trite example, but I give the example of Silicon Valley, as being sort of this hub for many, many years. And of course, you hang around there too, and have been there for many years. Tell me a bit about what you think has been the sort of driving force to not be dead, to be that curious individual doing things, constantly motivated. Even now, at this stage of your life, it sounds like you're already involved in things. And during COVID, you've been involved in new projects. So you're constantly keeping yourself charged up, and it's still going, right? It's like still going.
You know, I think sometimes I feel like I'm the fish that can't discover water. You know, I'm just kind of, I'm this guy that I go down a rabbit hole and I get thinking about things, and all of a sudden I said, boy, the only way I can get this into the world is to start a business. You know, it's kind of a blessing and a curse at the same time. Like I don't have the option of just saying, gee, this is an interesting idea. I kind of have to do something about it. You know, I feel like just having an idea, you don't own it until you do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think the people around you and the environment around you has a big role to play?
Massive amount. I mean, and it has a lot to do with happiness too. I mean, you go to some of the Asian countries where people they've got nothing, and yet they seem pretty damn happy. And you know, that's kind of the win. And it really gives you a understanding of the disconnect between wealth and happiness. I mean, I'm sure if you're starving and cold, that's not very fun, and so you got to have some minimum level. But once that minimum level's there, you know, do people who have Netflix, are they fundamentally more happy than people that don't? Not sure.
Right. Yeah. You really speak to, you know, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Basically, if I have my basic needs covered, then my needs of belonging and feeling part of a group or a community, and then that search for meaning and purpose.
Right.
And so it sounds like you've really recognized that in your own journey, and that keeps you going. And then when you see people who are alive or dead, how much are they on their journey of that hierarchy as well?
Exactly. Yeah.
It's one of the. In fact, next week we have a speaker who you actually might know, a chap called Mark Stallman, who was the guy who spotted AOL and IPO'd AOL and then Sun Microsystems, and he's coming on the show next week. And him and his team and some stuff that I do with them talk about this concept of flesh robots. And these days we're just flesh robots, you know, like in the UK or in the US, we get onto the subway 9 or 7 in the morning, whatever it is. We come back at 6. We do it day in, day out, that groundhog mentality. And I think the COVID situation has been an awakening of sorts for many of us. And maybe we should feel positive about it, because I know you're very bullish on the future of technology. And I've seen you talk about the 2050 scenarios, right? A new world. You're much older, but you're living in a greener environment without traffic. You've got your robo-taxi. You see that as a positive thing. A lot of people don't. Which brings me to one sort of controversial question, which has come up loads of times, which is about your Atari days and this concept of new technology and gaming. And parents are kind of pissed with it, and the users of the games are loving it. And I want to get your perspective on 21st century gaming, Minecraft, Roblox, this new kind of gaming. I mean, the graphics on Roblox are really basic, right? But the psychological impact, the addiction to it is just intense. What is your understanding of this stuff as a founder of one of the first gaming devices ever?
I think that I go back, I'll put this a little bit in context. There were countries in the early days that banned coin-operated games. They, and I know of no software engineer that's not a gamer, not one. Mm-hmm. And those countries that banned games early on fell behind in the next wave of when all of a sudden they were looking for good programmers, because they just didn't happen. They weren't curated, because games sort of provide some of that impetus to understand, how do you make a game? How do you program a game? And it's programming. I mean, in the UK, there was a thing called the BBC Buggy early on, which created all by itself a whole generation of British great engineers and game designers. Just that one thing in the British school system. And the BBC Buggy was really a crappy computer. but it was the right thing at the right time. And I don't know, did you ever play with that at all? The BBC?
I did. Yeah, it was a keyboard, basically.
Yeah.
The one he's talking about, an orange. Someone gave me one, donated one to me, but it on hindsight, it was crap. I mean, it was more for word processing, I think, than gaming, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, then Clive Sinclair.
Yes. Yeah.
All that guy. Anyway, okay, we could go down that. But I think that the environment and the happiness and all of that play a part, because what that infrastructure does is it provides a very, very critical component, and that's optimism. You don't start things if you're pessimistic. You got to believe you can succeed. And there is nothing that helps you believe you can succeed by working next to somebody that's a dumbbell who's successful. And you say, if that dumbbell can be successful, I can, because I know the guy just barely can put his pants on one leg at a time. And I was actually lucky in the early days that the first game that I licensed my first game to a company that was massively incompetent, and it gave me that real encouragement to, when I started Atari, we had no money. It's kind of before venture capital had been invented yet, but because these bozos, I'd licensed my first game to it, I said, hey, I can't possibly mess it up more than these guys did. So off we went. And so that infrastructure of optimism really helps. And there are areas that are optimistic and areas that aren't. Like there were parts of Europe for a while that if you failed, you were over. Instead of seeing a failure as a learning thing, which is Silicon Valley, I mean, there's certain venture capitalists that won't invest in a company in which the founder hasn't had at least one, flame out.
Yeah.
While we're on the topic of gaming, I want to get your take also on how it's changed over the years in terms of, we've even talked about addictions and people being hooked into the game and the technologies that have changed to capture people's attention. Yeah. How do you see, from the days of Atari to what you're seeing out there today, what do you see are the main differences in that? And is it concerning? I know you have 8 children yourself. Is that something that's been concerning for you? Has that been like, hey, it's just what happens, it's not really any different? How do you see that in terms of gaming and addiction and what's made of that today?
Well, first of all, when we design a game, we're looking to make it addictive. That's kind of like the gold standard. as a parent, do you want your kids to have diversity of outcome, and that I don't want them playing, World of Warcraft for 24/7.
Right.
Absolutely. And I can remember my youngest son is just a character and a half, and he was addicted to this one particular game, and I decided I was going to put a limit on him. And so I put a limit on him. And of course, what he did is he put a keylogger on it so that he immediately found out what my password was and hacked it.
Oh my God.
And so I thought to myself, okay, he wins. I'm not worried about it.
He won that game for sure.
He won that game for sure. You just got to know when you're licked.
Do you game yourself?
I do. Yes, sort of. Like, I'm not good at real time anymore. You lose a few milliseconds of reaction time every year you get older. And so, if I were to play any first person shooter with my kids, I'd be killed and dead, and they'd packed up and gone home before I knew I'd been hit. It just doesn't work. But I love turn-based games where you zero out latency and reaction time. I still play Go online all the time.
Right.
It's still my favorite, absolute wonderful game. It's talk about addictive, and the thing that's interesting about Go is it tracks your mental health. Like, when I'm happy and exercised and everything, I win. And when I'm frustrated and angry about something, I lose. It's really funny. It's a barometer. It affects your game. Anyway.
What about if we zoom out a moment more to entrepreneurialism? And once again, this is something I'm so fascinated about with you, just given your track record and being on the leading edge for so long. One of the telltale signs of entrepreneurialism is one's tolerance to risk and how one can hold risk. And so I'd love to hear more about that from you. What have you learned? And this is for all the entrepreneurs out there listening and people who are starting their businesses or have been doing it for a while and are needing to iterate again. What can you say? What advice can you give around risk, and how do you identify how do you balance that intuition you might have plus the data and research that you do? Tell me how that works for you.
You do a lot of research, and I think that a lot of failures come from a lack of prior planning, and when I say deep dive, I mean deep dive. But there's another factor. And my current process is, whenever I get a business idea, I write a micro business plan. That's maybe 3 or 4 pages. It has a rough look at what I think it would cost and what the revenue could be. And, it's kind of all my thoughts put down on a piece of paper. And then I put it in a pile, and I call it my marinating pile, where it's to marinate. And that came from a realization that all of my successes were at the right time, at the right place. My failures were wrong time, wrong place. And if you have just one idea, there's only one time now, one place here. Whereas if you got a stack of stuff marinating, all of a sudden the world changes, and all of a sudden you realize, this is the right time and the right place for that one. And so the match between the time and the place and the business concept is more aligned and more likely to be successful.
What about marinate? I like that word. I mean, we love food too, and I think it's marinating ideas is a damn good idea. Tell us a little bit about, in the same sort of pathway, You talked a lot about deep dive research, and I want to throw another sort of somewhat controversial point. What's happened with entrepreneurship, as you well know, that it's become democratized. Everyone seems to be an entrepreneur these days in some way, shape, or form. That's kind of good. It's a good thing. And of course, failure rates are much higher because you can come up with that one idea to solve that one problem, and you try and fit your product into the market, and then you try for a bit and maybe you get some seed money and it fails. And so we know failure rates are relatively high. But it's all good because the funnel is building up and people are heading towards the right way. But there's a downside, a very sort of sinister side to this, which relates back to state of mind. And you talked about when you were gaming and when you're not in flow, you do badly at the game. When you're chilled out and relaxed, you're in flow, in the right state, you do well at the game. You know, one of the big problems in entrepreneurship today is that younger and younger people are getting into entrepreneurship, not necessarily because they were born into it and they have this big desire to do something amazing, but it's almost like a career to some extent these days. You know, like in the old days, it was like, go work for KPMG, go get a job at this technology company, work for XYZ. Now it's like, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a tech entrepreneur.
Yeah.
That has its pros and cons. Talk us through where you see that being a glorious outcome versus a sinister outcome. And is what I'm saying making sense to you in the context of what you do?
Yeah, it does. There's also this thing out there called entrepreneur.
Yeah, entrepreneur. Yeah,
I've experienced that before. Yeah,
and the entrepreneur thinks they want to be an entrepreneur, but they really kind of self-sabotage because they don't want to be tested.
Right.
They really, if I could just raise this $14 billion so I could build my car plant, I'd be a huge success. But gosh, nobody's going to put me down for that. It's silly. One of the things that I believe is lacking in a lot of entrepreneurs right now is they don't have any work experience. And I probably had 20 jobs by the time I was 19. And all over the thing, from construction work to selling clothes to selling encyclopedias to, I had life experience and a lot. And, kids don't realize that if they've basically grown up, gone to summer camp, gone to college, graduated from college, maybe done a little bit of, been a lifeguard at a pool somewhere, that all of a sudden they don't know how the world works. They haven't even flipped a burger at McDonald's. And I think that there's a lack of valuing the experience you get from flipping burgers at McDonald's. There's almost a disdain for it, as opposed to it's a cog in learning. And so I think that a lot of the failure rate is just really green as grass people who are basically unemployable otherwise, because they have no experience.
Yeah.
And they think because, hey, I have no experience, therefore I can become an entrepreneur. No, exactly wrong.
Yeah. It's a salient point. It's a very important point, because I think we need to neutralize what's going on right now, because there's a very large contingent, a generation of young people, not just young people, but folks who think, well, actually, I'm out of a job. Look around. Well, companies seem to be raising a lot of money. He's successful. He's rich. Social media says everyone's doing well. Mate, I'm going to become an entrepreneur. And I hear it all the time. And I went into entrepreneurship when I was 35. So I had loads of corporate jobs. I failed. I succeeded. It was a baptism of fire. But luckily, I had that experience. So I was able to make some good calls, more bad calls sometimes, but I was able to make some good calls. And I think what you're saying is very, very valuable. Do you think, we're staying on the same pathway, do you think if you were to set up Atari today, different world, right?
Right.
How would you, it's a really arbitrary question, but how would you do it today? How would you, in this environment?
I think, first of all, Atari in the early days never had enough money. Like we were bootstrapping all the way, and I mean, venture capital really hadn't been invented when Atari started. That sounds funny to tell, but we were at almost 30 million in sales before we got any VC at all, and it was only $3 million. You know, it was a piker compared to what's going on now. So if Atari were to start now, I would have capitalized it well, and then we could have done a lot more stuff. And I probably wouldn't have had to sell to Warner either, because that was strictly because we couldn't do the 2600 without some infusion of capital, because it was a very big project. And yet I knew it was the right project at the right time, but it wasn't the right project for Atari without more capital. And so that would have been a big difference. I think that there are two or three things that would have been different. I know that I would have replaced the 2600 in 3 years. I felt that was the right thing to do. Technically, it was because the cost of memory had just plummeted. The 2600 only had 128 bytes, not kilobytes, bytes of memory. 128. That's nothing.
Yeah.
And I felt that if we could do a line buffer, a memory line buffer, the quality of games would just shoot up exponentially. And I had the design all knocked out and everything, and Warner didn't want to do it because they populated it with a bunch of record people. And they thought that, hey, we're not in the record player business. We're in the record, we're in this cartridge business, and it's a great business. And it was a great business. But if you didn't upgrade the technology pretty soon, anyway, water under the dam.
There is. I don't know this firsthand, but apparently you had some interesting people working at Atari in the early days who became big names in the future. Tell us a bit about that. And hopefully some of them are still around, and don't know if they're still in your peer group. But I noticed there's the crew. When you build a crew and you build a friendship with a bunch of people, you carry it on for many, many years. So have you still got some people around who were with you in the Atari days, or even Chuck E. Cheese, because we haven't got to that yet, but even the Atari days? Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, a lot. I mean, everybody knows that Steve Jobs and Wozniak worked for me in the 70s, and that and I kept track with both of them. Jobs while he was alive. Several others, that've gone on to do some wonderful things. I can think of my engineering team at Atari was rock solid. They were so damn good at everything. They could just crush walnuts with their brains. And so that was always enlightening. They've all made too much money. Like if I did a startup, I couldn't get any of them to come work for me again.
Right. One of the questions that's come through from one of our audience members, Martin Ectors, he's wondering, what was it like to manage Steve Jobs in particular? He's got a reputation, as we all know. Like, what was that like back in that day?
I never saw the bad Steve Jobs, not once. And Jobs respected me. And I think that was the whole big difference. If he didn't respect you, he could be just a real shithead. And I think that that he respected me, and therefore I didn't see it. But subsequent to that, I've heard things, and concurrently, I know that he had a couple of direct report managers that didn't like him much either.
Yeah, I remember one thing you said to me in our pre-call was that he was just that kind of character where he didn't really care who you were on the org chart. If he thought the idea was stupid, he was going to say something. He wasn't going to hold back. Exactly. And he just had that kind of that was just part of his character. Is I'm just going to blurt out what I think and feel, and I'm not going to censor that.
Well, in some ways, I think he felt that he needed to be brutally honest with everything that he did. I'm not sure that was good for him long term, but I think that at that point in time, he really felt that if he had an opinion, his opinion was as important as anybody else's.
Yep.
It's that self-confidence.
And then I wanted to sort of change gears because we've got loads of questions, but I wanted to talk about Chuck E. Cheese because you know when you had the Warner purchase go on, I think the sense was you were frustrated by the fact that they wanted to do something in a particular, your vision was being compromised in essence. And so you went off and you did this Chuck E. Cheese venture, which still had the arcade and the gaming aspect of it. And I love your quote, when you were asked to tell us about Chuck E. Cheese, what is it? You said, well, it's an arcade masquerading as a restaurant because you serve pizza. Right. Tell us, and I think it was quite, I've never been into one, and I was in the UK, so I didn't experience it as a young man, but I know it was part of Rick's life.
It's huge.
A huge part of his life. Tell us a little bit about, because it's got glimpses of Disney in it as well, a tad. Tell us a little bit about how it started. I know you brought in an amazing CEO at that point, Gene, and what were your takeaway? What were your biggest learnings with Chuck E. Cheese?
Well, the epiphany was that I felt that Chuck E. Cheese was integrating towards the market. That is, we were selling coin-operated games for $1,500 to $2,000 a piece. That in their lifetime they do $30,000 to $50,000 in coin drop.
Okay.
And so it didn't take rocket science to say, hey, I'm on the wrong side of this equation. But I didn't want to compete with the people I was selling machines to. And the competition for them was for locations. Let me put my machines in Joe's Bar. Well, then, if I were to go in and talk to Joe's Bar, I would be competing with the guys. So I wanted to build my own place. Secondarily, I knew that kids 2 to 12 really loved the video games, but there was no place for them. Bowling alleys were a little bit rough. Bars were not available to them, and that was about it. That was the landscape. So I wanted to have it be a kid's place. I wanted it to be an arcade, and pizza was easy to do, hard to screw up, low food cost. And then I felt, okay, the kids are going to be in the game room. The parents are going to be bored. I'm going to put on a show, and I'll use, it'll be like the Tiki Room, but I'll do it with vaudeville stand-up comics. And so Chuck E. Cheese was born.
Wow. And apparently you opened up 50 stores in 1 year.
Oh, yeah.
And so what's happened? So what happened? So it reached a peak of success. Was there something that sort of stopped its flow? Well, what was your big takeaway from it? Because of course businesses go up and down, and there's a bit of a journey that you go on. And was there innovation after building?
The thing about it, once you had the formula down, you didn't want to innovate. It was just step and repeat.
Yeah.
But what happened? There was a time when the market got oversaturated, partially by us and some hangers on, some competitors. And when we first opened in a location, people would drive for an hour to get to a Chuck E. Cheese. Because if you're in Omaha, it's not very dense, but if you can drive an hour, you can get a lot of people. Well, when grandma would come in town, you got to go take Chuck E. Cheese. So the repeats for the first year were phenomenal. But after that, it kind of settled down to once a month, once every other month kind of thing for the family. And in certain areas, we found that we were overbuilt. And so the business had to rationalize in order for everybody to be happy. So, I say Des Moines, we woke up one morning and there were 6 Chuck E. Cheese-like things. There's a couple of showbiz and that. And it was a market that really could support 2 to 3 at full profit. So you until the market rationalized itself, everybody lost money.
Got it. Yeah. And what are you doing these days? Because apparently you've been involved in all sorts of ventures, and I know that you're involved in education. Tell us a little bit more about the journey these days. What are you up to? What's the cool stuff you're involved in?
I did a adaptive practice learning platform that was before its time. And I never really closed it down, but it was kind of on mothballs, if you would. And so I'm ramping that back up full tilt because, homeschool and remote learning is all the rage. And the technology is massively powerful. Like I can accelerate learning to give the kids the equivalent of what they currently learn in high school, all 4 years, in 6 months. That's the promise, and I can show on that because when people don't realize how much wasted time there is in a typical school day, and so just getting some of that fixed.
What are you doing? What are you doing differently in your platform that's able to condense learning?
Learning is really a lot of learning is just done wrong. It's passive. When you read a book, passive. When you watch a video, passive. When you hear a lecture, passive. And they try to make it active by taking notes, but your brain really isn't engaged until you have to answer a question. So our software, you have to respond to it every 3 to 5 seconds. That's where the learning takes place. You have to think about it. Because, you're passively viewing a whole bunch of stuff every day as you just go through life. How does your brain know what you're supposed to remember? And until you think about it and you respond to it, that's the clue that says, "Oh, remember this," and it changes the motivation. So it's a technology we call it adaptive practice, in which
you're launching it again, or you're getting it funded, or
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Can you tell us what it's called, or is the name still to be?
It's called LearnUp.
It's called, sorry?
LearnUp. Yeah.
LearnUp. Okay.
LearnUp.
LearnUp. We'll keep that in mind.
LearnUp is a little bit like a turnip, but learning. And then I've got another one that's called Weird Woods, which is a camping gaming experience. You think of an escape room.
Yeah.
Now turned it into an escape trail in the forest. You bring the woods alive and do a zip line, but now in VR. So now you can zip line from the top of the Eiffel Tower to Echo Militaire, across the Grand Canyon, down, and then one of the things we're doing is creepy cabin, where you have to go and escape the zombies that are coming. Every slasher horror fix has a bunch of teenagers out in the woods in a cabin.
Right.
Now we're going to give you that ability, and all the windows are infield video screens, and then the zombies are coming after your butt.
Wow. Make it even more realistic. I would love to tune into some of our audience questions. We have a lot of great questions coming in. And it's also a good reminder, if you're tuning in live right now, send in your questions and we'll get Nolan to answer as much as possible.
Yeah.
So this first one comes from one of our past guests, Kate Bond. And she asks, given innovation ranges from everything from nibbling around the edges of transformation to true disruption, can you offer some insights that you've uncovered through the gaming world that might even translate to other sectors like financial services or enhancing the customer journey and experience?
Yeah, there are 2 or 3 different characteristics of innovation. There's an innovation that people don't know that their life is going to be better. So you have to not just show them that the technology, but you have to show them that their life is better. Amazon Echo is one of those things that if you talk to people, half of the people hate them and half of it like it. And I have so many things that I have under voice control. My wife hates it because, she thinks I've got an affair going with Alexa.
She's jealous.
Well, I think the more you use it, the more that Echo understands you.
Yeah.
And I think that she in fact does respond better to lower pitched voices. And so it could be a little bit of efficacy there. But I think there's a lot of people right now don't understand how a voice controlled world can be better. And it's pretty simple to do. But understand that the more radical and disruptive you are, the harder you're going to the harder it will be for you to get funded. Like if I wanted to do a game company, just video games or what have you, I could get it funded day after tomorrow. But if I want to do something that's actually interesting to me, that's revolutionary and difficult, that's hard. Because say, well, what do you know about that?
Right.
I said, well, I kind of know about that.
Right.
That sort of thing. And I think that you always. I love the story about Ned Ludd, who started the Luddites at the end of the 19th century, and he basically was a weaver that was displaced by automation and started the anti-technology movement. There were more British soldiers fighting the Luddites than they sent to fight Napoleon. A lot of people don't realize that historically. And so the Luddite movement is alive and well today. They don't call themselves that, but they've got all the mindset and the structure. And politicians are the most pernicious, because if a politician says, I'm going to do this to save jobs, he's always on the wrong side of things. You basically, your objective in life is to destroy jobs. And there will always be more things that you do. In fact, I wrote a short story a few years ago called 100% Unemployment in a Day. And all it did is just make lives, everybody was replaced by an android. So they didn't have to go to work anymore. But in 3 weeks, they were back working again because they just wanted a double paycheck.
Right. We have another question coming from Jordan on Facebook, and he's asking, how do we turn passion into success? I have great passion, but find many dead ends. The beginning is a struggle.
Beginning is always a struggle. And passion without research is not an answer. And what you need to do is start out maybe being a little bit humble and just start out by, can I make an extra $200 a week on a side project? I'm not quitting my job. I'm still working, but I want to make extra money by making and selling something.
Mm.
And then somewhere along the line, you say, well, if I'm making an extra $200 a week, maybe I can make $1,000 a week. What would I need to do that?
Mm-hmm.
And so you start walking up this slope of increased opportunities, and pretty soon maybe you're making enough money that you can hire somebody. You still haven't quit your job yet,
Mm.
you know, because you can't afford yourself yet, but you can hire somebody at minimum wage to actually run your other little business.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're doing is you're exploring, and you're starting to understand the market, and you're starting to understand the challenges.
Mm-hmm.
And all of these things are good for your eventual success.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think starting out a little bit humble can maybe be your answer.
Mm.
I really like what you're saying to Jordan here. And for Jordan, what I really hear is there's the passion element, and it's, you have to have that fuel to keep you going. But you're also mentioning, Nolan, the discipline side. Like, do your discipline around the research, find those incremental steps to start getting some income on the side, but don't fully jump to the next thing if you don't have that safety net for yourself. Like, really being smart about those discipline pieces.
Yeah. The problem is, Nolan, a lot of the books that have been coming out over the last 7 to 10 years, it's almost zero to hero mentality. You know, just go for it. You know, just do it. Not really thinking through what you've just said, where, of course, people bypass research. I mean, they read a few articles and say, right, I got it. If I had this problem, Nolan, I'd solve it this way. Right, I'm going to build a business on that. And so the market research has gone out of the window. But that's great. Can I ask one question before we run out of time?
Sure.
A little bit about, you know, you're for us, you're an icon, right? And you, I guess, as a founder and as an entrepreneur, you are Nolan, the icon, the entrepreneur, and then you're the dad and the partner and the husband and so on and so forth, all the other roles. I'm sure you've got grandkids. You've got 8 children. What an amazing legacy. Have any of your kids been involved in any of your ventures, or have they taken after you in any way, shape, or form?
They all have.
Right. Wonderful.
In fact, I have 5 sons, 3 daughters. All of my daughters, my daughters are probably more support structure. Like, my oldest daughter has run my PR for 20 years. And she's excellent. And she really, and she's basically the PR agent for the games business. Because she understands it so well. My youngest daughter is a financial planner. And so she does all my investment for us, you know, which isn't really in the game business. But my 5 sons, they're all in various aspects of the game business. My oldest son has a thing called 2-Bit Circus, which is a micro amusement park here in Los Angeles. If you go into the web, it's an amazing place. It's 50,000 square feet with VR and escape rooms and all kinds of hoo-ha. My second son is doing a thing called Polycade, which is a arcade reenactment for your home or doctor's office or what have you. And my third son is all about laser engraving and games that you can build through 3D modeling. My fourth son is doing game development for a couple of companies. And my youngest son just cut a deal for $500,000 for a game that he developed and just sold off. So, you know, he's at 26 years old, he's a millionaire. So I'm happy about that.
That's incredible. That's very inspiring. Thank you for sharing that.
And I am proud, by the way.
Yeah. Hashtag proud.
Proud dad. One last question from our group here. This is from we have an internal Mavericks group from our WhatsApp page for STL that we generate with our past speakers, but also our audience members, and anyone listening can join as well. So Deshang from our group asks, You famously turned down the investment in Apple at seed stage. I think you had even shared with me it was something like 50,000 they were offering you for a third of Apple.
Right.
And his question to you is, how did that change your approach to identifying opportunities after that point?
Not much, actually. And because I actually think, and I may be, a little Pollyanna here, but I think the outcome may have been different, because I think that Mike Markkula, who took my place, who basically did the investment, was Steve's early mentor.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't invest in Steve because I didn't think he was good CEO material at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
And Mike Markkula, by being the first president of Apple, became that adult and that mentor that allowed Apple to become successful.
Mm-hmm.
So I still think you bet on the jockey, not on the horse, in terms of companies. And if you feel that the team is lacking, I think that you still have to say no.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well said. I like that point. That's part of the research you should be doing out there, is the leadership, the board, like all the factors that make the company move. The jockey, as you say.
Let me tell you a funny little trick. I will not hire or invest in somebody unless I have dinner with them, their wife or husband, and my wife.
Nice.
And the thing that us guys don't realize is that we are big, clumsy oxes compared to the nuance that our wives can figure out.
Yeah, correct.
And she has been able to suss out phonies, frauds, and pretenders that I was totally smitten by.
Right.
And I've just learned that that's an asset that I don't have, and so I'm going to remediate that. So, anyway. Oh, and the other thing that's interesting is my wife can figure out things about the other woman's husband through the wife, because the wife can
I see. She'll see her reactions to the husband, et cetera, et cetera.
I mean, it's the funniest damn thing. It's just theater. It's just theater. One meal, up or down.
That's great. We're coming to the end of our hour here. I mean, we could do this for another hour easily, or much more time. We'd love to have you back at some point if you're open to that, Nolan. What we want to ask you is just, do you have any final words for the next generation of leaders, the people that are out there today that are going through really tough times with COVID and all these unpredictable moments we're having, climate, all kinds of stuff that we never had to think about in the 70s, 80s, 90s as much, and now it's in our face. Any words of wisdom for the new generations listening today?
Don't panic. Fundamentally, the data that you receive on an everyday basis is amplified maybe 5 to 10x what the reality is. And so if you plan your life around faulty data, you're going to make mistakes. And so you have to understand that when you're being clickbaited and all that, and you just have to get a lot of different sources for your data inputs. Second, understand mathematically statistics, the difference between correlation and causality, that a lot of times things correlate, but they're not causal.
Correct. Yeah.
And, I can remember my first course in statistics where the professor said, if you only learn one thing in this class, is to not confuse correlation and causality. And I've taken that to heart, and it's really saved me on a lot of stuff. Mm-hmm. Third part, understand when there is a singularity. And a singularity somehow will wipe out trend lines. That is, there are trends that go into a singularity and then trends that come out, and they're going to be different, some of them massively different. So right now, you may be the most fertile time for innovation you've ever seen, just not in the same way that you've ever seen it before, because there's been a singularity in COVID. And so understand the mathematics around that a little bit. I mean, and I'm not talking about upper level, but there's certain things that the world tells you that if you don't pay attention to it, you're making a mistake.
Yes.
It's powerful.
Love it.
That's powerful. We will cut that bit out, and we'll use that in a lot of our content, because I think that's those three very important lessons of life. We need to keep reminding ourselves of it, because we get caught up in the hype of everything that's going on today.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Nolan, I just want to say thank you again from Straight Talk Live and from each of us. I just want to say I think you're doing something right, and how I know that is a lot of what you talked about today really came back down to curiosity, aliveness, play, optimism, being engaged, learning. And it's so obvious how you're still being sourced and so vital from all of those values that you're living. And so I can just tell that you're doing it right. And I want to be like you when I grow up. So thank you so much for all that you bring and all that you've led and done, and helping the next generations the way you do, and your continuing curiosity.
I never want to grow up.
Good. That's the Chuck E. Cheese motto. So thank you again. And so honored to have you here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Yeah. Did you want to say one last thing?
Oh, I was just going to say, my wife often says that she's got 7 children and no husband.
Right. That's great. And just for those tuning in, next week, we're going to go on with one of someone that you know, Nolan, Mark Stallman.
Oh, yeah. Mark's a good guy.
He's a good guy, and he's going to be on our show next week. We're going to go live with Mark, and we're going to talk about the 3 spheres and what he's up to around what's happening right now with the East, mostly China, the West, and also digital, and how that's all playing out in today's ecosystems and what we need to know globally. Yeah. So it's going to be a fantastic show.
I'll do that.
All right. Tune in. I'll send you the link. And for all those listening, thanks again. And may this bring more curiosity and creativity to your day as you go out there in the world and straight talk with the people around you.
Yeah.
Over and out, everyone. Thank you so much.
All the best.
Thanks, Nolan.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.